All right, we're here with our Hellblade 2 review, and yeah, I found the game extremely disappointing, and I'm going to get into that, but definitely between a rock and a hard place on this review. Not fun, I'll tell you what, because the Xbox community despises me. They think I hate the brand, and then we have PlayStation fans who despise me as well, because they think I love Xbox. And then also there's that kind of weird factor in the middle of I kind of made comparisons between Ninja Theory's potential and Naughty Dog, and they didn't like that much, and that's a take that's going to age like milk based on this review. And yeah, I'd like to issue a retraction on that one because I was definitely dead wrong. Worse yet, the circumstances surrounding Hellblade 2 couldn't be worse for Ninja Theory. There was already a lot of anticipation for the game. Ninja Theory was acquired by Xbox in 2018 with what felt like a public statement to gamers that despite what had happened during the Xbox One generation, the company was here to stay and invest in smaller games as a part of their business moving forward. The feeling right now is that Xbox needs its biggest win yet in a time of great uncertainty surrounding both the company's direction and the lifespan of its 30-plus studios. At the same time, Xbox is under fire because of its lack of marketing for Hellblade 2 and what is their first major exclusive in 2024 and a potential prestige product, something they've said behind the scenes they're looking for, to rebuild some public confidence in the brand. The trick is, guys, gals, is Xbox did market this game a lot. You've possibly seen like every big moment of Hellblade 2. My Naughty Dog take may have been completely incorrect, but at least I can hang my hat on the fact that I called this one from pretty far away as to why Hellblade 2 wasn't being marketed. It wasn't really, in my opinion, being sent out to die. There just wasn't much left to show, as I'll display in this review. Announced alongside the Xbox Series X in 2019, many expected Hellblade 2 sooner, and I think the game would have actually fared better in my experience if it were just that, maybe a launch title or something like that. It's a game that feels like it's been lapped by much of its competition, such as A Plague Tale: Requiem, in every conceivable way. It's a game that could serve as a case study to show how perfectionism has seeped into AAA-style games and lets them spin their wheels for far too long with little meaningful progress made for the actual players of the game, merely just the technology. It's a game that perfectly shows how a larger team size doesn't grant you a better game. Ninja Theory was around like 20 some odd people when Hellblade 1 was made. They were 80 with Hellblade 2. And I think you can feel that in the visuals, but when you play the game, nope. It's a game that shows you how mere graphical fidelity can no longer carry an experience, and in my opinion, never could. Worse yet, I think Hellblade 1 is far better in almost every aspect. Its level design, pacing, storytelling, and even how it gets to the core of touching issues like psychosis, the series' primary theme it delves deep into. Hell, the combat could be argued as being better in the original, given you no longer have mechanics like dodge roll attacks, and that's saying something given Hellblade 2's combat isn't really having much going on there. If I were to define this as anything, to put it in a little bottle here, it's Xbox's The Order 1886 moment, but even then, it's kind of a stretch, which is why it's not in the title of the review. I really like games such as The Order 1886 and Rise Son of Rome. Both served as showcases for their respective hardware and made no hesitation about flexing their technical might, yet they didn't leave the most important factor behind: fun. Both of these games, in my opinion, are very fun to play when they let you play. Rise's combat is a guilty pleasure, and its story is extremely entertaining, leading to me doing full playthroughs twice over when I first bought my Xbox One at launch. The Order's world and story take time, but when it picks up alongside its gameplay, I think it's excellent, and then it ends. It's that line there that you can closely draw between The Order and Hellblade 2. Hellblade 2 has its fleeting moments of excellence beyond its visuals, but they're quickly forgotten due to most of the experience consisting of walking forward, boring puzzles where there are far too many, might I add, an unreasonably limited amount of combat encounters, and an ending that leaves you feeling like there was so much left on the cutting room floor here. I'm going to get into rich detail now, but that's the too long didn't read. Hellblade 2 is a game that certainly I was championing. I don't make Naughty Dog comparisons lightly, and they completely missed the mark in my opinion, and I far prefer Hellblade 1. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here and you're into the occasional day one review, consider subscribing. Let's start off with the story. I'm going to go very light on this section because we're talking about a game that has maybe a runtime of 5 hours. So Senua is traveling to kill the Northmen who are abducting her people and enslaving them. She's quickly derailed from that plan in a tale that feels like it made very little sense until the story's dying moments. Instead of this being a story focused on just Senua alone, she's joined by a support cast that doesn't get much of an opportunity to shine outside of one who joins you at the journey's very beginning, and his development does add quite a lot to the story. Otherwise, the short runtime here hurts as these added characters don't have much time to develop. Meanwhile, Senua's journey is a depiction of how others interact with one who suffers from psychosis, and the game displaying how her darkness, as they put it, is a gift that can save her people. I think? I'm not entirely sure here. Right? And not because I'm an idiot. It's because I think the game, compared to the original, does not convey its themes well enough throughout, again, this very short runtime. Remember in the first game, Senua was cast out because her psychosis is claimed to be a darkness handed down from her mother. That journey was about her overcoming that alongside the grief of losing the only one who ever loved her and trying to bring him back to life. In the sequel, Senua is still coping with death, but in a different way, as it's following her wherever she goes, and she starts to begin to blame herself for the death that surrounds her both past and present. In Hellblade 1, everything from its combat to even the puzzles was in service of an impactful story being told. You didn't just fight to break things up, you fought because it was a depiction of Senua's struggles at that moment. You didn't solve puzzles to extend the length of a game, at least most times. It was typically done in synchronization with Senua learning something about herself or the world. Hellblade 2 is the opposite in all regards, and perhaps that was the saddest part for me about this review. It feels like all that Ninja Theory did to make the first game special was completely forgotten for pretty graphics, beautiful lighting, and exceptional motion capture. I think it's wonderful because it definitely is going to be a technical showpiece, but as someone who loved the first Hellblade, I feel like we totally missed what made that game special. Now, for those who haven't played Hellblade before, one of its greatest strengths, and it is present in this game, is being unable to tell what's real and what's not. However, I think there was a thread that Ninja Theory kind of had their hand on that they would pull at times to really connect things and make sense of what was real and what wasn't, whether it be through how encounters were set up and what Senua was actually fighting. Was it her personal demons or actual enemies? Hellblade 2 does just that. This game is super seamless in its storytelling. There's no breaks for load screens, nothing like that. It just goes, and that's one of the best parts about the game is you'll just have these beautiful transitions between reality and maybe not reality, and then big cutscene and gameplay, and it's all, again, beautiful and seamless. It is definitely something that many AAA developers are going to study, but I think as a player of games, there isn't going to be a lot for people to take away here because, again, when you go down to the story, the main thing I loved about Hellblade 1, as I raved about it in my original review, Hellblade 2, I think, just delivers things in such a messier way. And even when you start to come to understand what they're trying to do here by the game's final moments, it ends. Just like I mentioned with the Order 1886, you're like, okay, I'm on board here. If we get like another 2 more hours here, this is about to be sick. And then it ends. Now, some may say, well, that confusion, that's the point, Matty. That's the whole idea of the game. You're not supposed to really know. You're supposed to be in Senua's shoes. You're supposed to really feel her pain, her confusion, and fair. At the same time, though, I think Hellblade 1 exists as a perfect example of doing that without totally losing the player. And oftentimes, I found Hellblade 2's story to feel quite aimless, which you just can't afford to have in such a short runtime, as I'm about to hammer home here in many other ways. I'll just say that I can't imagine many people are going to be thrilled to wait for a part 3 of Senua's Tale after 5+ years of waiting for Hellblade 2. Just to get to this point, play for a few hours and go, okay, I got to wait another X amount of years for more. It definitely leaves you feeling a little shortchanged. The game's visuals do aid its storytelling capabilities. I mean, it's basically a 5 to 6 hour movie, so it does the job well. The motion capture is absolutely excellent, as is the acting. The performances here are really good, in my opinion, and can heighten some of the biggest moments in the game. The voices, though, that Senua hears, speaking of psychosis earlier, in my opinion, are handled worse this time because they're basically like the yellow paint for storytelling. Rather than depicting Senua's uncertainty, the struggles that haunt her, most times they just point out the obvious during very important cutscenes, and oftentimes are speaking over characters already talking. But that's the point, Maddie. She's experiencing this, and you're feeling it through her shoes. I feel that there is a way to do it right, Hellblade 1, and a way to do it wrong, Hellblade 2. Beyond just having these voices speak over important parts of the story, which to many may be a compelling part of Hellblade 2 because it puts you in Senua's shoes further, for me, it was serving more as a distraction, but perhaps my biggest problem is what I stated earlier, which is the usage of the voices, in particular, pointing you toward various obvious things in the world. You know how all these AAA games have yellow paint all over the place and it just guides you throughout the world? Think of that for storytelling when it comes to the voices Senua hears in her head, which is in line with other AAA games where they're telling you where to go, where to climb, who to talk to, what you should do for your next objective. It, to me, misaligns what the original point of the voices in her head were, which was to guide Senua as a character, right? To evolve her character, describe her thoughts, paint a picture of that. Instead here, they're used to, well, guide you to the next step. It's not all the time. Oftentimes her thoughts will develop her character. And it's in those moments that I feel the greatest pain, because it's like, we're so close. You have those moments where you're right there, you get it. And then you go back to using it as yellow paint instead of actually enhancing and exposing different parts of Senua's character and the various thoughts she was having. Like, someone would clearly be menacing and the voice would be like, oh, they're evil. They're clearly evil, clearly bad. I'm like, yeah, I can I can tell he's got his weapon drawn on me. It would just in those moments not add to it. Again, this is going to be something I think many people are going to have a problem with, because you're not supposed to critique these types of things. But I just think when you look at Hellblade 1, they used it in a much smarter way. To my surprise, Hellblade 2 actually does have a New Game Plus option that can add a little extra time to your play clock if you're so inclined to double dip. I won't say what it is, but on a second replay, it may add some new wrinkles to the story. It's not enough to save your experience if you're in my shoes, but you may end up liking it a lot if you end up enjoying the main story of Hellblade 2. Ultimately, I think games like A Plague Tale Requiem are perfect examples of how this style of design from 2017 has been lapped multiple times, might I add. But I think A Plague Tale Requiem is the best example, because that was my game of the year in 2022. It's a game that managed to have that cinematic movie feel. It put all of the story at the forefront, no doubt about it. This relationship between Amicia and Hugo was literally all it was about. Much of the time in that game is spent walking around, talking, building that relationship. But that relationship never forces you to sacrifice meaningful gameplay, exploration, interaction with the characters in its world. This design was really left behind in the late 2010s, and I think Hellblade 2 is a perfect example of why. It's just been lapped by other games that looked at Hellblade 1 likely and evolved it. To wrap up the story segment before we move on to gameplay, I just want to say that Hellblade 2 does have a lot of great moments throughout. In particular, I think the second half is full of more good moments than bad. As someone who's covered Xbox for the last half a decade, Ninja Theory has always been clear that they wanted to deliver an audiovisual experience. And even if you were looking for answers like, how does gameplay move forward, you typically hear something about motion capture, lighting, performance tech, that sort of stuff. You'd never hear about combat, new moves, even the storytelling in a sense. You never really heard much about it. It was always about the audiovisual experience, which Hellblade 1 is famously known for. The problem I have, just to be extremely clear here before we move on from most of our storytelling critiques, is that Hellblade 1 didn't leave behind a ton of its fun factor and also managed to convey its themes and story in a much better manner. And that's why I may sound overly harsh with this game, because the reality is I went in expecting an audiovisual experience, and I did get just that, but I was not prepared for, quite frankly, how boring and disconnected this game would feel, and we'll talk about that now with the gameplay. I don't know how else to put this, but what you're seeing is about the first 40 minutes of Hellblade 2. Yep, just the analog stick forward, and that is no exaggeration. I know this because whenever I'm recording gameplay, I have my Elgato software up, there's a timer, and when I pressed my first set of buttons for combat in the game, I looked over and went, oh wow, 40 minutes, no breaks. 40 minutes. I was like, okay, wow, almost an hour of gameplay, and I just walked forward the whole time. And that wasn't the only time that would happen in Hellblade 2. The pacing is absolutely dreadful in Hellblade 2. And look, I am a massive JRPG fan. I don't want to hear from one person how I need to be more patient or more understanding. I love these movie types of games. I can totally get behind them, all right? And I have the patience to sit through 90, 100 plus hour games. But when your game is barely crossing the 5-hour mark, you need to go. You need to go much faster than this. I'm not saying I need action constantly, because it's not even that. It's just compelling character interaction, more happening on screen. Most of this game is graphics flexing as you walk through pretty barren but extremely beautiful environments. There's no denying Hellblade 2 is the most beautiful game you can play right now in 2024. It is stunning how good this game looks. But that's also what most of the time in development was spent on, how good the game looks. And it's not because you're walking around and taking in the sights that the pacing is bad. It's because you oftentimes hit puzzles. This is the same gameplay formula you found in Hellblade 1. You would walk around a little bit, you'd hit a puzzle, you'd find some combat, rinse and repeat. How does Hellblade 1 do it better than Hellblade 2? I think things like level design went much further in Hellblade 1 to make it more interesting to explore these locales. Number 2, I think the puzzle segments were, in my experience and in my memory, extremely brief. I think 3, the combat sections and the storytelling sections were much more longer and stretched out, thus leaving a lot more impact. Whereas in Hellblade 2, you get puzzles like this bubble one where you're kind of switching between realities and it's changing the world around you. You just focus on them. There are the same rune puzzles that you'll remember from Hellblade 1 where you have to like focus on these symbols and match them all up. And this culminates in one of the all-time worst chapters in a video game I've played, Chapter 3 in Hellblade 2, which is like the halfway point of the game, by the way. You are just running around with a torch lighting fires for like an hour, and that is it. It is, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it is like snoozer time gaming. Like, I was struggling to stay awake. I am not like that, not at all. Like, I take my job very seriously here. I don't want to be disrespectful to developers. I want to do what's best for gaming. I am not like that, man, but this was really bad. And again, you just, in a game this short, you cannot have sections like this. There's moments, games that are much longer need these types of moments to be able to breathe. Like, okay, I need this downtime to solve some puzzles because most of the time I'm fighting. But most of the time in Hellblade 2, you're just wandering and solving puzzles. And the puzzles aren't really good or compelling or convey the game's themes well enough. They just feel like filler in an already short game. What it led to is me imagining, okay, what if I plucked all of these moments out? By the way, only one of these puzzles I ever got stuck on, but what if I just plucked all of these out? This game's runtime would be cut possibly in half, and I think that's why they exist. They don't exist to serve the game in any meaningful way, just to extend a runtime of an already tragically short video game, which we already knew short was going to be the thing going in, and that was fine with me. It's just that how you use that runtime is everything, and Hellblade 2 does not use its runtime well. This is a bigger shame because the combat in the game, which I have saved for last to talk about, may be mechanically leaner than its previous entry, but I enjoyed the encounters way more. The seemingly endless string of enemies. You finish one and then another steps in, and the way they step in, maybe killing someone else and then squaring up with you. It's seamless, it's beautiful, it's awesome. You combine that with the ramping music, the intensity of barely surviving, no UI, you don't know how much health you have. Some enemies hit harder than others. It's so wonderful, but at the same time, you wonder where the enemy variety is. I mean, this is the same company that made DMC Devil May Cry. I know people hate that game, but I love the combat in it. I get this is a story game, but I think it's inexcusable that the combat has evolved so little in so many years. You have a light attack, a heavy attack, a dodge button, a parry/block button, and you can use your mirror to basically mash through annoying enemies at times, or enemies that you just need to quickly get rid of because you're low on health. Still, I can't lie, like, even with less combat mechanics, I really enjoyed the combat in Hellblade 2 because it was about the intensity. You could feel how you were barely hanging on at certain points, and that made it great. I think with some enemy variety in there and a couple of extra moves, I'm talking like maybe one or two just to target these enemies, we would have something totally different here. But the fact that this combat is used so infrequently does the game a huge disservice. Not because my little action brain needs more stimulation, it's because the combat can be really good, and the moments it shows up, it does enhance what's happening because it feels like it's in synchronization with the story. Unlike the puzzles, unlike the extremely long walking sections, the combat serves a strong purpose in the story. Unfortunately, you can't say the same about the big moments in the game, where I guess you could call them Hellblade 2's boss fights. You really don't fight anything bigger than a singular human. The game's biggest moments are punctuated by walking/running segments. It's, again, a shame because there are bright spots, as I've hoped I've shined a light on, but I know it's mostly been critical, and it's because, unfortunately, as I said in the title, Hellblade 2 left me pretty disappointed. I am really sad to say that because, look, guilty as charged. Put a lot of belief into Ninja Theory here. I made the Naughty Dog comparisons. I will own that one every day of the week, but I was completely wrong, clearly, because while this team is a bunch of perfectionists, as I accurately said, I think they were perfectionists in the wrong areas, ultimately leaving a impact factor behind, which I know is goal 1 of Hellblade, and they failed on that front. But goal 2 for Hellblade being fun, they missed that mark too. I don't know what the reception publicly is going to be for this game. I expect something polarizing based on my experience. I think some people are really going to love Hellblade 2. I won't lie to you, I can't wrap my head around why, but it's definitely got that feel to it where for some people, this game will just scratch that itch. And if it does, if what I've described sounds like music to your ears, go ahead and try it out. I would still want people to support Hellblade 2. I loved the first game a ton. I love things from Ninja Theory in the past, but what they've done here with Hellblade 2, I'm not going to depict to you as this tragedy. I know that the emotions are heightened right now by many people watching this video because people want Xbox to get a big win and they need a big win. And this game feels like it had to be it. And I understand all that. But for me, just pulling myself out of that moment, just looking at the game individually, it just doesn't deliver on enough areas that I personally want. And I was left feeling kind of shortchanged with Hellblade 2. Is it still worth like a Game Pass download, you may be wondering? Yeah, I think, again, this is a good weekend game if you want to go ahead and download on Game Pass. But when it comes to the $50 price tag, I'm sorry, just can't say you want to buy this one at full price. When it goes down in price, or if you want to subscribe to Game Pass for it for a month, sure, go ahead. I don't know if that'll help out the studio, as we've already learned here with what's going on with Xbox, but for you as the consumer, that's not really your concern at the end of the day. You're here to know if a game's worth your dollar, and I would say a Game Pass subscription will do. I'm thinking of like Phantom Menace. Game Pass subscription will do. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts down below. I'm sure it'll be pretty. And with that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.